Before the Burning Legion launched its crusade, a small world took shape in a distant corner of the Great Dark. This world would be known by many names in the coming ages. The mighty ogres would call it Dogar, meaning the known earth in their brutish tongue. An intelligent avian race known as the Arakoa would later name it Rakshar, the Sunstone. In modern times, the most common name for this world would be Draenor. Draenor did not contain a slumbering world soul, but it was remarkable in other ways. Nearly all worlds in existence were home to elemental spirits of fire, air, earth, and water. Sometimes, these primordial beings were highly destructive. They took on physical forms and waged war against each other, keeping their respective worlds in a state of constant upheaval. Such was not the case on Draenor. An abundance of the fifth element, the spirit of life, had saturated the world. This force had a natural calming effect on the elemental spirits. It tempered their violent nature, and it even prevented them from taking on physical forms. The fifth element had another, far more extraordinary effect on Draenor. It accelerated the growth of flora and fauna. It made the world into a cradle of vibrant, untamed life. Creatures of every shape and size roamed the young world, vying for dominance. The strong preyed on the weak. The cunning preyed on the strong. Savagery became critical to survival. Draenor's greatest predators did not hunt with fang or claw. They hunted with root and thorn. A carnivorous, invasive strain of plant had sprouted on Draenor. These life forms were known as spore mounds. Their tendril-like vines slithered over the earth and strangled every primitive beast that they could reach. As they grew, the spore mounds consumed more and more. Their hunger and need to expand knew no end. They blossomed into living mountains of tangled brambles and noxious pods. Wherever the spore mound's tendrils crept over the earth, lush forests and swampy mires took root. Before long, a labyrinth of deep wild stretched to the far corners of the world. Not even Draenor's elemental energies were safe from the spore mounds. Their roots wormed deep underground in search of water. As they did, the invading plant life tapped into the fifth element that suffused Draenor's stones and soil. Consuming this primordial energy ignited a crude communal sentience within the spore mounds in the surrounding wilds. This newfound intelligence allowed Draenor's plants to act as a single, massive organism. The spore mounds and all other vegetation became known collectively as the evergrowth. If any major threat arose, the evergrowth could react in unison. Yet such threats were non-existent. The evergrowth dominated everything in sight, and nothing could hold it at bay. While the spore mounds flourished, Agramar continued his hunt for demons. His grand mission eventually took him near Draenor, a world not yet discovered by the Titans. Agramar lingered among the vast emptiness over Draenor, listening for the dreams of a world soul at its core. He heard none, and yet the world still intrigued him. He had never seen a place of such voracious and diverse plant life, a place of such untamed savagery. The more Agramar observed the evergrowth, the more he foresaw doom in Draenor's future. If left unchecked, the plant life would consume everything on the world, even the elemental spirits. Once that happened, the evergrowth would devour itself. Draenor would be left a dust-blown wasteland, devoid of even the most primitive life. The Titan warrior did not want to exterminate Draenor's plant life. He desired only to temper it. And he knew that to do so, he would need to neutralize the spore mounds. They were the heart of the evergrowth's power and the cause of its rampant expansion. Chronicle, Volume 2. Chapter 1. So, I would like to show you guys what came to be from these spore mounds, because what Agramar did is he essentially created a massive, titanically empowered stone giant named Gron and animated it from the crust of the earth, and he had it fight the spore mounds. This led to essentially the creation of the Magneron, the Gron, the ogres, eventually. and other things like genosaurs and other interesting creatures. Now, the thing about this is that Agramar foresaw that these spore mounds would inevitably take over and consume the entire world. Life would actually cause there to be no life. I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Infinity War, but this is pretty similar to the premise of why Thanos collects the Infinity Stones and puts them on the Infinity Gauntlet. The powers of time and space, power, etc. Because if life goes unchecked, then there will be no life. Well, it's quite interesting because also from the fall of the spore mounds came a race known as the botany. The botany we've actually seen in game. We actually fought them in the Everbloom dungeon. And I'd like to show you some things about the botany. So I'm going to take you back to the Everbloom dungeon here. And we're going to talk about some of the things that we see in there. Because life, man, life is terrifying. Now, before I jump into this theory, I do want to give some credit to someone who suggested this to me a long time ago. And that is a guy by the name of Gizmo. Used to be someone who speculated really often in my Discord. And he, from what I can remember, was the first one who proposed this idea to me. At the time, I didn't necessarily agree with him. But looking back now, back after doing far more research than I had ever done back then, I think he might have been onto something. So let's take a look. So just outside the Everbloom, there's some interesting things. There are these giant vines with red-tipped thorns on them, like razor thorn, basically. Doesn't look anything like terrifying nightmare stuff that we've seen before. It's probably not related in any way. There are these botany out there that are trying to spread life and basically let it take control of everything. And then they actually have these twisted abominations that are things that look like they used to be orcs that are now infested with life. And they are these giant shambling, basically life undead, which is kind of weird to think about. Given Kalia Menethil's resurrection, if that's what you want to call it, she's basically a light undead. So it doesn't surprise me that there can be some type of strange amalgamous kind of thing that should not be. These big shambling abominations. There's a lot of really terrifying things that we can see about the botany. And now, one thing you need to know about the botany is that they want to bring the spore mounds back. And they would work alongside the genosaur, giant four-legged creatures of life, to try to do so. By the way, you can find a genosaur in ANR's sanctuary on Elunaria. It's hidden down below the platform. I'll have a screenshot of it here to show you. And when you kill Agramar in Taurus the Burning Throne, he drops a life relic called Spore Mound Seedling. So we're supposed to believe that spore mounds just randomly appeared on Draenor? Or did someone put them there? Chronicle says the Titans hadn't discovered Draenor. I think that's a bullshit fucking lie. Now, if you caught what it was saying in Chronicle about them all working as a hive mind, I want you to keep that in your head as we move forward, because that's very important. Going into the Everbloom, there are a lot of botany in there. There's also a lot of really terrifying creatures in there that stem from life that are quite eldritch horror looking. If you get where I'm going with this, there are weird hydra plants that are carnivorous. They want to eat not other plants. They don't want to seemingly eat via photosynthesis, like taking in light, unless that's what eating other living things does, grants them some type of light. Maybe consuming the soul does such a thing, but they're carnivorous. They want to eat other living things, like meat, like crazy shit like that. So there are also dread lashers, these weird tentacle-looking flower things that pop up out of the ground that attack you. And the botany are in here doing some pretty crazy stuff. As you approach the second boss in the instance, they have some words for you. They say
The forest closes in around you.
You cannot escape. And upon killing them, you can move up to another area. And they apparently just return to the soil. They say that they will be renewed. So whether or not they're actually gone forever is up for discussion, I guess, right? They, in some sense, could be, in a way, immortal. They are just reborn in death, so similar to a demon. But you can move up, and this is where you start to see really troubling things, because the life is not only trying to kill and eat other things so that it can grow, but it is taking over the minds of things. There's a large spider in there, an infested venom fang, that literally has tentacles, like vines, which they're very similar to one another. In fact, in the War of the Ancients trilogy, there are several times within the first 50 pages of the Demon's Soul book where the tendrils of roots are compared to that of a kraken's tentacles. Weird. So you continue moving forward, and there are Kirin Tor mages whose minds are being taken over by the life. They even have these little sprouting tentacle things that are coming out of the back of their head. And then you come across the third boss in the instance, Archmage Sol, which is another word for sun, solar, ironically. And she is being attacked by several Kirin Tor magi that are also infected by the life. And she's using an arcane barrier to try to stop it. And I think that this is suggesting that even the arcane cannot withstand the might of life. Ironic, as that is, because Aman'Thul represents the arcane and Aeonar represents life. But I digress. You defeat the magi that are trying to get to her, and she says, "Flee! The vines! They control us all! She can't resist it. It's taking over her mind." So you try to fight her, and during the fight, she says a couple curious things, the most curious of which is, fire. Fire will burn away the contagion. She summons this little fire plant that pulses with flame.
Burn away the contagion.
And the idea here is that fire is what will extinguish this from them. Fire is what will stop them, and then when you kill her, she says, "Burn my body. It is the only way to stop them." And this might sound familiar if you've done Uldir. Remember, Mother, who I think is definitely a little bit of a suggestion of Aeonar, she tries to purge the corruption out of you with what?
It's the only way to stop
fire.
them.
Huh. Weird. It's probably nothing. And then there's a mage that was sealing himself within the tower nearby who comes running out and says, "The Genesaur," because there is a Genesaur, Yalnu, that is trying to go through this portal to Stormwind. He says, "The Genesaur, if that unchecked growth, if that Genesaur gets into Azeroth, the unchecked growth will choke the whole of Azeroth." Choke the whole of Azeroth, huh? I remember yogg-saron having a quote, something to the effect of, "The shadow of my corpse will choke this land for all eternity." So Agrimar foresaw that if these spore mounds, which the Genesaur came from, and the botany came from, they are descendants of, if that was left unchecked, life would take over everything, and there would therein cease to be any life. There is one thing, though, that I think could spur on more life, and that is the Holy Light, right? That is the entire point of the Holy Light in the Naru, is it not? Is to safeguard life and to bring order to worlds. It's their goal, right? Well, it says here in Chronicle Volume 2 that that's what the Titan Pantheon does, too. They will bring order to worlds, safeguard life, and stand for life, hope, and order. Well, if you've watched some of my more recent speculation videos, I believe that the Holy Naru and the Holy Light are crafted as a tool by the Titans. It is said that the Naru are forged by something, and They who forge are certainly the Titans, shapers and forgers of worlds. And given that the Naru's goal aligns perfectly with the Titans, and the Naru happen to also steer the Draenei, or the, at the time, Eridar, away from Sargeras, at least some of them, like Prophet Velen and those who were faithful to him, followed him, it would make sense to me that the Naru and the Holy Light, and even the Army of the Light, are in some capacity a tool of the Titans. I also believe that that would mean that the Lightbound on alternate Draenor, who want to preserve life and admonish the Maghar because they believe that they destroy life, they also would likely be in servitude of the all-powerful entity that is behind the Holy Light. I believe, personally, that Aenar, the Lifebinder, created the Holy Light, and so light and life go hand in hand. They go right together, right? I mean, I think that's pretty fair. I think that would make sense. But I wonder what really would have happened if Agrimar didn't craft Gron to fight the Spore Mounds, and what would have come to be in that world? Would the Spore Mound have consumed everything itself, and then only the Spore Mound would have remained? How would that work? What would happen? What if the basic functions of death were removed in that situation? What if the Spore Mound couldn't die? What if it just kept consuming and consuming everything around it? Similar to, let's say, Galakrond, the father of the proto-dragons, or, whatever. The biggest proto-dragon, it would just go around and consume and eat with such voracious hunger that he eventually became necrotic and started growing strange appendages and extra eyeballs and crazy shit like that. Very old god stuff. Well, it is said that old gods come from these beings known as Void Lords, okay? It says that in Chronicle Volume 1, and it says it again in Chronicle Volume 2. I'm well aware of this. I've read the books many a time. But see, I think there's some problems with that. Because it's very much so a boogeyman story. It's the red herring, if you will. Not but the red herring of the Warcraft storyline is the Void Lord stuff. Because it is told that these Void Lords pooled their powers as they existed in another dimension outside of reality and existence itself. They pooled their powers and hurled these dark creatures known as old gods through the cosmos, and they slammed into worlds because the Void Lords were trying to corrupt a slumbering Titan soul. They could not be affected while they were in a physical state. Somehow the Void Lords came to know this, and eventually Sargeras recognized that as the Pantheon had been searching for slumbering world souls, so too had the Void Lords. And when Sargeras learned of the Void Lords' plans, it drove him into madness. It drove him into such rage and fear of what would happen if they were able to corrupt a slumbering world soul that he vowed to try to stop them. And the way by which Sargeras was going to stop them, as written here in Chronicle Volume 2 and Chronicle Volume 1, was by purging the universe in flame and extinguishing all life. And yes, it was drastic, but it must be done. Interesting, because even on Argus, not all of the life was completely eradicated. Think about Macquarie. Plenty of life still thriving there on the home world of the Legion. That's weird. It's almost like that's not true. That all life had to be extinguished, but maybe just some of it. What I'm getting at is, if these Spore Mounds are left unchecked, I think that they turn into what we see in the Star Augur fight in the final phase. People have brought this up to me many a time. Pyro. There are plenty of other worlds with old gods on them. Just look at the Star Augur fight, or look at the planets floating in the sky after you defeat Argus and you're on the Vindicar. They have void energies and old gods on them. Do they, though? Are you looking at an old god on that planet? The obvious answer that I know people will say is, yeah, Pyro, you are. Duh, idiot. Look again. I would urge you to do so. Because there are some striking similarities between what you see on that planet and old gods, but there are also some things that don't quite match up. And the main thing is that there are giant, massive tendrils that, in my opinion, kind of look more like giant roots than anything else. And they even split. You've never seen the tentacles of the old gods split, have you? Like, you'd never see a tentacle that branched off into two other tentacles, like a root. And you see these massive tendrils reaching out to the sky. I would assume searching for light. Like a tree on the bottom of the rainforest. You know, a thick rainforest. There are plants that have to grow up other plants so that they can get to the light. They're vying for that light so that they can continue to thrive. But there is no light on these other planets. There is no light for them to reach, but the planets are completely barren. So what we're witnessing on these planets looks more like, to me, what I would imagine Agrimar foresaw with the spore mounds. One singular giant plant that would consume literally everything around it, and then it would only be that. So, you see where I'm starting to go with this. The Void Lords, I don't think crafted these old gods and flung them out into the cosmos in such a manner as what Chronicle would have you to believe. I think that the old gods come from life. They don't come from the void. But they do come from the Void Lords. See, I believe that the Void Lords, because I have fought many of them in game before. I fought the Fragment of Dementius. I fought a Void Lord at Oshigun in alternate Draenor. I have fought a Void Lord in the Halls of Origination. They are not that powerful. They were allegedly envious of the Titans. Envious. That's an interesting word to attribute to the Void. Envy. Envy. Envy is heavily tied to desire. Something which is heavily tied to life. To live is to desire. If you play Dark Souls, as Lumino, one of my mods, has pointed out to me many times, you may see some recurring themes here. And I hate to say it, while I'm not going to say that WoW is copying Dark Souls, because that's ridiculous. Blizzard's not that original. I think that they're original in some cases, but they're not that original. So really what I'm getting at here is that I think the old gods actually used to be something different. And I don't think that they always looked the way that they do. I think they became eldritch horrors and abominations because something happened to them. Now, I think that the old gods in the Black Empire used to be completely composed of life. And there is quite a lot to suggest this. Even just the descriptions of the old gods in Chronicle. They were mass mountains of blighted flesh, interesting, that spewed from their very form organic matter. What? They spewed organic matter right from their very bodies and gave birth to races. Right? Like the Akir, Naraki. Like the Klaxi. Like the Silithid. Bugs, mostly, is what they created. Bugs. Bugs in life. That's strange, isn't it? And the old gods used to be, from what we can see in Encourage, a pretty well-structured society. I mean, they had emperors and queens and royal garb and temple cities and, from what we can tell, even religion. They are living. The old gods are certainly alive, and they can die. That's what happens when we go and kill them. I mean, Y'Shaarj was supposedly ripped out by Aman'Thul, and then Y'Shaarj died, right? So something can die. Does that constitute that it is living? I mean, how can something die if it wasn't alive? The old gods are alive. I promise you this. And I do think that they used to be in a different form. Now, I think there is one that is different. And I think that it is N'Zoth. Let me point this out. Xal'atath is a fucking liar. Okay? Blizzard has said it. It's written in Xal'atath's flavor text. She's a liar. She lies about a lot of stuff. And for some reason, we have all just bit everything she has said and believed it as truth. Why? Why do we do that? When we're told that the blade's lying to us, why do we do that? Why do we believe her? I don't understand why the community does such things. But one thing that Xal'atath says to you insinuates that N'Zoth is the weakest of the old gods. I don't know about that. Because while Yogg-Saron, what he apparently did with Loken was pretty substantial. What Cthulhu did was pretty substantial, I suppose. Probably the least substantial out of all of them. What Y'Shaarj and the creation of the Shah did was pretty substantial. Think about N'Zoth. N'Zoth corrupted Deathwing, right? And empowered Deathwing and gave Deathwing that incredible flame form, this unstable, chaotic form that he assumed. N'Zoth made a deal with Ashara. N'Zoth is incredibly crafty, and so people assume that, oh, it's about physical prowess, Pyromancer. It's not about physical prowess. It's about tactical, it's about intelligence. So he's very weak physically. No, I disagree. I would wager that Xal'atath is lying about that, and N'Zoth is not the weakest old god. We're going to go on a tangent here real quick because I want to talk about N'Zoth for a moment. I know you guys love the N'Zoth stuff. In the Warbringer Ashara video, N'Zoth says to Ashara, "For 1,000 years, bound beneath these waves, I have watched you." If anyone actually reads Chronicle, they would immediately identify an issue with this, which I'm surprised none of the other massive content creators in the community have pointed this out. I'm the only one that talks about it still, and for some reason I still get written off when I bring it up. But N'Zoth was not imprisoned under waves for 1,000 years before the Sundering. N'Zoth, according to Chronicle, which everyone takes as truth in all regards, was buried underground. In fact, not even anywhere near Queen Ashara, the Well of Eternity, or her palace. So for N'Zoth to say that for 1,000 years he was bound beneath waves. I mean, Queen Ashara's palace was built right on the Well of Eternity. However, it says in Chronicle that that is the point from which Y'Shaarj was ripped out of the world. So then I have to ask you, what waves is N'Zoth bound under? And how is it for 1,000 years before the Sundering that even happened? Because if he was buried underground, I don't see why the description would be beneath these waves. See, there's a pretty big issue that's going on there. But in the imagery where we're shown the silhouette of N'Zoth, there is an incredibly bright light behind N'Zoth, and N'Zoth makes a comment to Ashara during this cinematic where he says, "Only I can sustain you." That is to say that N'Zoth can keep Queen Ashara from dying. Is that not true? Only I can sustain you. Death is near. So that is to say that N'Zoth can save her from death, right? That's pretty potent and powerful. Even while imprisoned, N'Zoth is able to do that. Well, I'm one to believe that N'Zoth reached out to Ashara when she was in a state of unconsciousness, as I think the cinematic makes it pretty obvious. And that N'Zoth was speaking to her in some type of vision, right? And I don't know how exactly he got the ability to shape her into what she is now, and to shape the Naga into what they are now. But I digress. The point is that N'Zoth was apparently under waves and sustained the life of another being. What the fuck? Back to my idea that the Titans created the holy light. Let's wrap it all together. And honestly, I'm not going to be able to put into this video in a reasonable amount of time all of the different little shreds of evidence and hints and things like that I've come across that make me believe this theory. But the Titans, the Titan Pantheon, one in particular, Aenar the Lifebinder, if she is the crafter of the light, the holy light, which I think is possible, because I think that the holy light and the void are imitations of two other things. I think they're an imitation. The holy light, I think, is an imitation of Azeroth, her light, the true light of the cosmos, as creation. If you haven't seen that video, you really should watch that one. It's one of my latest videos. And shadow, death, Argus. I think that the void and holy light are a replication crafted by the Titans of those two forces. Two Titans who happen to both be subdued within planets and completely inactive up until very recently. Is that not true? We have holy light and void swelling out across the cosmos, both of which are trying to bring the whole of the cosmos under their control. Let's not mistake that. The holy light is just as forceful and honestly pretty fucking Nazi-esque, to be honest with you. And I think that if Chronicle is right, in the sense that when the holy light spread across the universe, that cold pockets of nothingness, of negative energy, came to be where the light no longer shone, and that was known as the void. Does that not make the Titans, and specifically Aenar, the life binder, the light binder, light bound, life bound? You see where I'm going with this? Does that not make her the Void Lord? The creator through life of the old gods and the Void Lord. The one that Sargeras was so terrified of because he knew that if they succeeded in corrupting Azeroth, then he's fucked. We're all fucked. What corruption is that going to be, do you suppose? I mean, think about this. Why is Sargeras' solution to beating the Void Lords extinguishing life? Has anyone ever stopped to think about that? How does that beat the Void Lords? How's that work? The Void Lords, what, if you just kill all the life, they don't have anything to consume, and then what? That has nothing to do with their alleged goal of corrupting a sleeping world soul, does it? What does that have to do with anything? You see, they're pulling the wool over your eyes, and I believe everyone's fallen for it. We've all been made to believe that N'Zoth and these old gods serve these terrible void lords. And they do, in a way, but they're not giant void entities that are going to come into our existence one day and try to gobble up our whole world. I promise you that's not going to happen. That's never going to happen. We're never going to have light and void factions either, because both light and void are already on the same fucking faction. And unless Blizzard decides to do something which they've never done before, which is taking a race from a faction and giving it to the other one, don't think that's going to happen. With the Lightforged or the Void Elves, then it's going to stay that way. The light and the void are essentially the same force, one with energy, one without. Sustained, I believe, by the arcane, by time, by essentially entropy. And when the power that creates the light within runs out, it is left with nothing but pure entropy, pure negative energy. And if you really think that the Draenor figured out how to manipulate light and void, and that the Titans couldn't, really? The Draenor can do it, but the gods of the universe can't do it? I gotta stop saying that, because I don't buy into this shit at all. Not even for a second. The majority of the player base thinks that there are Void Lords and that there are Light Lords. Yeah, they're called Naru. And when Naru lose their light, they turn into void gods, as people call them. Who gives a fuck? They're the same thing. They're literally the same thing. The picture for the Void Lords on the cosmology map looks like a Void Walker. It looks like a Void God. So then people say, what about Koresh? What happened to Koresh, where Dementius apparently ate their world? That only happened because the Koreshi were trying to pursue evolution via the arcane. They were trying to figure out how to advance their civilization technologically, and they did something that drew in the wrath of Dementius. It's not like Dementius just came in out of nowhere. And then guess what? It slowly tore their world apart. This didn't happen in a blink of an eye. It wasn't like everything was in panic and they didn't know what to do. They let it happen. They let it happen. Because what happened to the Koreshi? They became fucking immortals. If the void eats everything, do you think that everything in the void is going to die? Or do you think that it will all become one with the void? All shall be consumed. All will be consumed by it, but you won't die. You will be immortal, but have no energy. You will become entropy incarnate if the void were to eat everything. But it technically, in a way, keeps living things living, doesn't it? And this is the cruel frozen void into which we will fall if the Pantheon is allowed to succeed. This is why Sargeras was so terrified and so angry. His rage was not for random void lords that were in another dimension. It was for the Pantheon, and it was specifically for Aenar. He's probably terrified of her. I would be. Have you guys noticed that in the cinematics with her and Aman'Thul, in the imprisonment of Sargeras, they frame the camera on her and Aman'Thul pretty much the whole time? They're always in the shot, basically. Have you noticed that Aenar, the god of life, who hid away on Elunaria while her brothers were tortured, by the way, she walks up to Aman'Thul, the god of time, and tells him,
You have done well,
it is time.
mortals.
It is time.
And then he kind of glares a little bit and kind of looks over at her. Almost like Aman'Thul doesn't even like her, to be quite honest with you. Return home, children of Azeroth. We must gather our strength. Oh, do you need to? Does Aenar need to gather her strength too? Because she's been sitting pretty on Elunaria for who knows how long, and has not been being subjugated by demons like the other Titans. Life is the one calling the shots. She's leading the Pantheon. It's not Aman'Thul. He might sit on the throne, but behind every king, there's a greater queen, some say. I had to figure out how life assumed control and how all of this came to be. I was reading Chronicle again. Oh, Chronicle, the greatest and worst thing to ever happen to the WoW lore. And in Chronicle it states, after Sargeras proposed his idea to the Pantheon, that Aenar specifically, in most of the dialogue, most of the actual interactions between the Titans in Chronicle is between Aenar and Sargeras, very similar to the RPG lore. Anyway, Aenar reminds Sargeras that the Titans had sworn to protect living things whenever possible. Well, Aenar, being the Titan goddess of life, probably falls under that umbrella. And I don't think that the other members of the Pantheon can actually defy her. I don't think they have a choice. I think that the Titan of life, Aenar, is completely in control, and likely has been for a while. And Sargeras, in some capacity, has broken free, hopefully, I think, of said influence, and decided to try to start eradicating life to thwart the Void Lords. Don't you see? The Void Lords is the pin in the bullshit of the story. It's the fucking dumbest shit they ever wrote into the game. It's the dumbest thing they could have ever written. Because it's just a masking term to try to get you to think that the bad guys are the good guys. It's so typical. Like, this isn't even that original on Blizzard's behalf. The old gods and their corruption is the Titans' fault, and they don't even own up to that. Did you guys know that in the new raid coming out, Crucible of Storms, there's a boss called, it's like Unyat or some shit like that, Harbinger of N'Zoth or whatever the fuck. In the description for the boss, literally talks about the coming of N'Zoth and the Black Empire as foretold by the stars. Foretold by the stars. Who are the stars? You mean the Titan Pantheon? The stars? The gods of the universe? It was foretold by them? Is that to say that most of the calamity or failures of the Titans was literally planned? Was this written? Was this destiny written? That the old gods, in what all the different ways that they have escaped, or none of them ever really escaped, or corrupted or influenced, the failures in Ulduar, the failures clearly in Uldir, is that all orchestrated? Because if it is, we're fucked. And now Sargeras and the Burning Legion are gone, and Sargeras is locked to the seat of the Pantheon with the Void Lords themselves. The one guy that was going to try to use death, a pretty merciful release in all things considered, and not the end of everything, because there is a cycle in this game, he was going to use that to try to free us from the grasp of the Void Lords. We fucked that one up, didn't we? This is the last thing I'm going to say. If you don't believe that what happened with Sargeras is a bad thing for us, and that in the grand scheme of things, he really is a super duper bad guy, and that the Void Lords are coming for us, well, the Void Lords are coming for us. But in an interview from BlizzCon with Alex Afrasiabi, there's a question where someone asks, and I will have a link to this interview in the description below. Someone asks, what's going on with Sargeras? Is his story done? And Alex Afrasiabi basically says, the red star in the sky, people have noticed it. There's a constellation there, and it's a red floating star. And we'll just say that if that red star ever goes out, if it ever disappears, that is a very, very bad thing. Well, one would assume that that red star is the remaining rift between Argus and Azeroth. That's what I thought for a long time. That's what it was. That's not what it is. Who would care? Who cares that that rift closes? Big fucking deal. It's not what it is. You gotta watch cinematics in slow motion, and you gotta watch them very carefully, because during the imprisonment of Sargeras, we're shown something. And that red star, that's Sargeras. That's part of him. I believe that it could even be his soul. And if Alex Afrasiabi is saying that if that ever goes out, if it ever disappears, that's very bad for us. Yeah, I think they're trying to tell us something. We are in so much more shit than anybody even realizes. We are on the precipice of oblivion in this game right now. We have been shown so many signs of the apocalypse and of Ragnarok. Like Surtur, which literally says in the Wowpedia page for Sargeras, Surtur, the Norse god of fire and bringer of Ragnarok, takes a giant sword and sticks it in the earth. That sounds familiar. Shit is about to go down. People are out here trying to figure out what the next 5 expansions are going to be, and I'm sitting here wondering if we were going to fucking make it that far. Are we even going to get that far? And what happens if the Titans come? What if they show up and they deem us unworthy? Are we going to be cast into the void? What's going to happen to us? Well, just as in the void all things become one, and what goes into the void becomes one with the void, we have heard that same phrase come from others about the light. In the light, we are one. In the void, we are one. And right now, there is no more chosen one. Illidan's destiny was written, and he's not going to come back to save us. I don't think that's going to happen this time. Only we can save ourselves from what is coming. And as Varamathras says, we are blind to the true darkness closing in around us. We're in a lot of trouble, you guys. And it never was the Void Lords. It's always been the Pantheon. It's been written that way since the RPG lore. As I've said multiple times in videos, Sargeras came to realize that the Pantheon had a falsified ordering of the universe, and that the way in which they were trying to order the universe was fundamentally flawed and would end up causing calamity. And so in order to stop them, Sargeras would have to undo the work of the Titans in the cosmos, and it just so happens that in Chronicle Volume 1, the first planet that the Burning Legion goes to destroy is not inhabited by old gods as far as we know. It's a planet that the Titan Pantheon had ordered in ages past. It was a planet that they had already influenced. And there are little hints everywhere about this conflict between Sargeras and Aenar, in between darkness and light. In the void and light, they're on the same fucking team. It doesn't matter if the Void Lords use shadow magic. Shadow is not the same as void. Even in the description for the Shadow Priest spec, it says they harness shadow magic and void magic. Like, they're not even the same thing. But even in the Chronicle Cosmology map, it puts them on the same tier. They're not the same thing. Oh, we're in trouble. But this video, which I anticipated was only going to be about 20 minutes long, has turned into almost an hour. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. And I wish that I could include all of the little details, all the little quotes, and all of the little things that point towards this. But I'll be the crazy guy. I'll be the guy that maybe 90% of the people don't agree with. And I would never compare myself to these people on an intellectual level or meaningfulness of discovery level. But there was a time where Galileo and Copernicus were considered crazy and insane when they said things like the Earth is not the center of the universe. Oh, shun him for saying something against the order of religion, as the light is. But they turn out to be right. So I'll be the guy that people say is wrong, and if I turn out to be wrong, that's fine. But this is what I think is happening. I think the old gods are the fault of the Pantheon. I think that Sargeras has done nothing but try to stop them. I think that the Pantheon wants to make, specifically, Aenar wants to make the universe completely dominated by life and by light, and for all things to be undying and eternal forever. Just forever. Everything will live forever. Newsflash, immortality is not a blessing. It's a curse. And that's why they call the gift of flesh, the gift of mortality, a gift. Because it grants us boons that give us strength and hope and courage and all of these things that can be achieved through the light. But it also grants us the ability to inevitably, one day, die, as all things will. That's the theory. If you guys enjoyed, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel if you're not subscribed already. And you can follow me on Twitter if you want. And I stream on Twitch. Not as much recently, because I've been busy with work. But when I get back to a regular schedule, I will be streaming more over there. And yeah, I'd appreciate it if you guys would check out my Patreon. If you want to throw a couple of dollars at me every month to support my channel, that would be certainly appreciated. But no, you never have to do that. You can always just come back and watch my content anytime you want. And yeah, that's it. That's it. We're in trouble. We are in a lot of trouble. And we were blinded the whole time. Our faith has blinded us, just as Illidan said to Turalyon. And I don't know if we're going to be able to get out of it. I don't know if we're going to be able to win. I think the only way that we can is if Azeroth wakes up. Maybe Sargeras' sword was meant to try to accelerate that process. I don't know. But I'd love to know your thoughts, so leave them in the comment section down below. Appreciate you guys very much. Stay awesome, and until next time, I'll see you guys later. Peace!